Hey now, welcome to the Dirty Side of the Track, America's leading Formula One podcast. I'm Brian, that's Rob. We have an amazing special edition of the Dirty Side today. Rob, tell everyone what they can look forward to.
Well, today we can look forward to, I'm going to call him F1 royalty. He is, in my view. We've got Matt Bishop on the show today, and if people don't know who he is, he's recently just finished as the Chief Communications Officer at Aston Martin. Before that, spent a long time at McLaren and has basically been in Formula One since before either me or Brian was born.
Well, you didn't have to say it that way. But anyway, having Matt on was an honor. He is amazing, so appreciative of the generosity of his time. And it's another great reminder of how amazing the F1 community is. When people, leadership like Matt, participate in the community and just talk to two random bozos like us. Thank you, Matt. That was really amazing. So anyway, you're going to check it out. It's a great interview. We actually broke a story again. I mean, we are just Jack Villeneuve and the battery and Matt, and you'll find out what. I mean, just amazing.
Yeah, when he dropped that little thing and he said, "Oh, that's a scoop for you guys," I did go afterwards and do a little bit of Googling, and I can't find that he mentioned it anywhere else. So that's a big enough teaser. You're going to have to listen now. I mean, we booked a slot with Matt for an hour, and he was gracious enough to accept. And we got up towards the end, and I was really worried because he'd said that was his end of his time window, and he went over, and he didn't care because he's got so many stories to tell. Anyway, let's not worry about that. You're going to hear all of that in a few minutes. We're going to do a real quick news and social, and then you're going to sit back and enjoy us talking to Matt. So what have you got, Brian?
So obviously the only a couple things to hit this week quickly, the important stuff. One, Williams has a team principal now. So very exciting news. James Vowles from Mercedes, the Mercedes strategy director, moving over. Valtteri, this is James. And now, he's at Williams. So I don't know. What do you think, Rob? I'm excited. I'm excited for him. It seems like a good hire, and I'm excited for Williams.
I know. I think it was Lee on the Discord was kind of, or maybe it was Andy, I'm not sure, was saying, is it too big a job to try to put Williams back together? And it's like, well, maybe it needs that fresh set of eyes, someone new to the role, going to have that energy and passion to drive it forward. Who knows? But the most important thing was, as well as Mike Crack giving jokes to the world of the internet, everyone dined out on, or most people dined out on the playoff between vowels and consonants. Here at the Dirty Side, we decided to go slightly different, and being as he was a strategist, whatever that word is, we've decided that over at Williams now, to mimic Ferrari's never-ending letters of plans, Williams will feature plans A, E, I, O, and U.
And sometimes Y. That was a very well played dad joke F1 style. I mean, it is the intersection of all the best flavors of jokes. So anyway, good luck to James, and good luck to Williams. I think, I was thinking about it, all the teams. Are there any people who hate Williams? There's none. There's no reason. There's
no, and yet probably maybe growing up watching it, you've got a few people that did, because let's face it, people tend to hate the people that are winning all the time.
And
so right now,
they haven't.
Williams haven't won anything for ages. So right now, and so maybe it's actually, if people don't hate you, that's maybe a bit of an indication that you're not dominating at the moment. But I think most people have a soft spot and would like to see them back up there again.
Agreed.
Then, of course, if they do get back up there, if they're up there for a while, everyone will start throwing stones at them and want them to come back down again, because that's the nature of sport. But
well, good luck, James. A couple other notes in the news. One is a sad one, and we just wanted to pass along our best. Jenny Gao, the F1 reporter, suffered a stroke, a serious stroke a couple weeks ago, and we saw the news just yesterday. And so I know I speak for Rob, and I think for almost everybody, I would assume, in the Dirty Side community, when we send all of our best to Jenny and wish her a speedy recovery. It's just a bummer when someone I think very highly of and appreciate her work very much has suffered this. So good luck, Jenny, on recovery. And then the last note I had before we hop over to the interview is Drive to Survive's coming, Rob. Do you have your popcorn ready for season 5?
Yeah, and I think I was not thrilled with season 4, and I think going into it eyes wide open a bit more this year, that you've got to know what you're letting yourself in for. We talked to Matt about it, and he had the same view of it. You've got to know what the animal is, and once you just kind of let go of that whole, it's drama, that didn't happen, fine. Sit back and enjoy it. So I'm coming into, because of where they moved the needle in 4, and it went so much to like a drama-mentary.
Yep.
if that's what it's going to be, okay, I can make peace with that. So I'm actually looking forward to 5 now more than I probably enjoyed 4, if that makes sense. 5 for
It
4,
does.
yes.
I mean, I loved 1 and 2 and 3. And as we recapped 4 here on the Dirty Side early on in our infancy as a podcast, and we both thought it was far too over dramatized. Because I think we walked in looking for more of the documentary aspect or the behind the scenes, and then they're mixing radio from different races, and we joked a couple weeks ago they're going to put in Kimmy's radio over Max at this point, and who knows what. Like, it's just so silly. But yeah, I am excited. And so the date, just to close that out, that's February 24th, season 5, Netflix, Drive to Survive. Get your popcorn ready. And also keep the popcorn now, because you're about to listen to an amazing interview. Once again, Matt Bishop. Thank you, Matt, for doing this. It was just an honor having you on.
Okay, this week we are amazingly privileged to have a huge guest from the world of Formula One. It is my great pleasure to introduce Matt Bishop, former Chief Communications Officer at Aston Martin, and many things before that we're going to go over today. So welcome to the Dirty Side, Matt.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you for coming on, believe me. We just, what we thought we'd do today is kind of just take a brief look at kind of how you got into Formula One and where you went along the way, and kind of little journeys along the side. And where I really want to start is go back and kind of do, like I said when we kind of chatted before, is the origin story of Matt Bishop. Now, there is a story that I've heard you tell on a couple of interviews and a couple of pieces that I read, that it feels like you had a real sliding doors moment as a kid. I'm not quite sure how old, you can fill us in, but essentially you had a subscription to the same magazine I did as a kid, which was Shoot magazine, and one day you decided to trade that in for, I think, Autosport, and as they say, the rest is history. Now, is that a true, real sliding door moment that you look back on and think, what if I hadn't changed that magazine? How much did that change that whole future for Matt?
I mean, it is a true story. I always loved cars, road cars. Just the kind of road cars that there were in the late '60s and early '70s when I was a kid. In England, Austin, Cambridge, Morris, Oxford, Wolseley, Hornet, Riley Elf, things that don't exist anymore and sound so old-fashioned now. Anyway, even when I was a tiny kid, I could recognize them, and my mum was very surprised. Nobody in my family was interested in cars at all, so she was surprised. And you have to remember, Formula One wasn't on television then. The British Grand Prix and Monaco occasionally. But it was never in the newspapers. It was never on the news bulletins. It was never talked about at school. It was an extremely recherche niche sport, which is hard to imagine now because, of course, now it's such a big sport. But it was a tiny sport. And literally, when I was a kid, football was the sport then as now, soccer. And then rugby and cricket. But Formula One motor racing was down with below bowls, below croquet. Bowls was on the television. Formula One wasn't.
Wow.
And so anyway, it was. I then went into the local newsagent in Highbury, North London, where I used to live as a kid and where I was brought up, to pick up my copy of Shoot, which, as you say, is a weekly football magazine, soccer magazine. And I saw this thing called Autosport. And it was in the summer of 1972. So I would have been nine and a half. And there was this extraordinarily beautiful blue car on the cover. I'd never seen anything like it. It didn't look like an Austin Cambridge. It didn't look like a Morris Oxford or a Riley Elf or a Wolseley Hornet. It was, I now know, Jackie Stewart's Tyrrell, but I didn't know what it was. And I thought, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I said to the newsagent, whose name I remember, I have an incredible memory for some reason. I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday, but I can tell you that the newsagent's name was Ron Newton. And in Highbury Corner, and or near there. And I said, what's that? He said, that's Autosport. That's about Formula One. These were just syllables to me at this point. I said, what are you talking about? He says, motor racing, son, motor racing. So I said, oh, okay. Can I have that instead of shoot? He said, well, it's 2p more. You'll have to ask your mum. Because I think one was 10p and the other was 12p or 12 or something like that, pence. Anyway, so I ran home, asked my mum. She said, okay, you can. So I then changed my weekly magazine from Shoot to Autosport. And in terms of my enthusiasm for Formula One, the rest was history. But I actually thought, because I actually thought this was an extraordinary magazine that must have been written for me only, because I could be the only person that was actually interested in cars that raced. There was all the evidence in my life was that nobody else was at all interested in it. I mentioned it to people at school, Formula One. They looked at me as if I was from Mars. Nobody had even heard of it. That's what you have to remember. I know that obviously it had a following, and Jackie Stewart was a multiple world champion already, and he was British. Before then, Jim Clark. But I'm kind of exaggerating to make my point. There must have been brilliant champions from Britain in croquet and bowls. But it didn't mean they were household names, and it didn't mean that anyone in my class had heard of them. And that's what motor racing was like. That's what Formula One was like.
Matt, I'm going to go a little out of order as Rob and I kind of had some questions, but your introduction and origin story to F1 and the way it spoke to you really resonates, and especially because we have a large American listenership here for even longer. It felt like a secret club. Like there was a handshake. You'd meet someone. If they liked F1, they were immediately your friend. And you like F1 too? Even into, the 90s, it felt like, and even early 2000s. And obviously that's shifted and changed, especially increasing momentum recently with Drive to Survive. And so I guess I'd be curious your thoughts on the shifting and changing of people's, new fans' origin stories from reading about it in a magazine to the secret club of, oh, I like it too, to now Drive to Survive really opening, especially in America, some of those floodgates to people who may not have known about it. And I'm just, as you see this evolution, what are your thoughts on kind of the new version of people's origin stories?
I'm aware of what you described about American fans, because of course, when I finally started working in Formula One, which was about 30 years ago, and I encountered Formula One fans in America, although not immediately, because of course, for a long time, quite a long time, there was no United States Grand Prix until it returned with Indianapolis. But when I then encountered them, they were this secret society. I could tell they were incredibly enthusiastic and incredibly knowledgeable, but realized they were few and far between, despite the fact that America is, the home of the automobile, and therefore, to some extent, the home of automobile racing, with NASCAR and IndyCar and so on and so forth. Anyway, so I was aware of that, and it's an interesting parallel you draw. As regards more recently, with the explosion in interest stateside as a result of Netflix Drive to Survive, I welcome it incredibly. I'll be honest, Drive to Survive is not necessarily targeted at people like me. It creates narratives to support a blockbuster global broadcasting phenomenon. But that's great. You just have to realize that not every nuance is accurate.
Right.
You just have to realize as you're watching it that if they beat up a certain rivalry between two drivers, they have done exactly that. They've beaten it up. They know that. They don't tell. If you speak to the executives, they say yes, that's what we have to do. But when I've been talking to the teams I work for, and actually during Drive to Survive, it was always Aston Martin. It wasn't in existence when I worked for McLaren. So I had to explain to Lawrence Stroll and more latterly Martin Whitmarsh and Mike Crack, etc., that we won't have control or even influence in the same way as if you arrange for Sky F1 uh, whose journalists are friends of yours and so on to interview, let's say, Lance Stroll. You'll give them 12 minutes, they'll broadcast 4 minutes of it, and basically they can't really mess around with it much more other than what they have asked and he has said. Okay, they can edit some bits out and so on and so forth, but basically it's what it says on the tin. It will be that interview. Whereas, because Drive to Survive is the result of literally millions of hours of filming, the enormous majority of which ends up on the cutting room floor, they really can edit it in a certain way in order to create and push certain narratives. But I'm not saying that as the cynical old curmudgeon who regrets it. I'm saying that is why it has been able to enlist and recruit a whole new demographic of fans that Formula One has never enjoyed before. So I welcome it. And I'm certainly not one of these people who you see on Twitter sometimes, ghastly cesspit that it is, who criticize new fans and say, you know, I don't want to talk to you because you're only a Drive to Survive fan. Drive to Survive fans are wonderful and precious, and we should welcome anyone who has an interest in our beautiful sport.
Yeah, I totally agree, because everybody has to find their own way into whatever sport, whatever thing they have a passion for, right? So I'd be interested to go back a little bit as well to find out how you progressed, because again, not to date you too much here, but a bit like myself, back in the day, no such thing as the internet, right? Now, at least when I was growing up, it was covered in the newspapers more, so I could get my weekly fix of reading the race reviews and all that kind of good stuff. My son lives in an era now where if he likes something, he just goes online and can watch about 10 hours non-stop of video on YouTube about something. So the way that we consume things now and the way we get into things is different. But no fan has got the right to gatekeep how someone else gets kind of into it. So I agree with you on that one. But it's interesting you were kind of talking about no coverage. So let's just wind back again. Let's do a Marty McFly and go back a little bit again. Back to you as you've got your magazine, you've got your Autosport. How do you go from that 9.5-year-old lad who's got this magazine, okay, and that's his only view into this world that he didn't know existed? How about, I think it's maybe 10 years or so later, well, if Wikipedia is true, that you then start freelance journalists and going writing for these things? What happens in those 10 years? Does it become more mainstream? Do you have to go hunt it out? Because there's no YouTube for you to go and use.
It was more than 10 years. I'll tell you what happened. So then what happened was 1976, and James Hunt won the World Championship in still one of the most dramatic finales we've ever had. You know, he needed to finish third to get 1 point more than Niki Lauda. He would have won the World Championship if he'd finished fourth on countback, although on the same number of points, but more wins. And it was the wettest race that, one of the wettest races there's ever been. Completely absurd to race it. Fuji was incredibly quick. And in those days, and not a safe track in those kind of conditions. And famously, Niki Lauda parked up after a couple of laps, as by the way did Emerson Fittipaldi, also a multiple world champion at that time. So it wasn't just Niki Lauda, but it was Niki Lauda who was dragged the headlines. Then, of course, James Hunt was leading, and the world championship was there for him to take for England and St. George. And then, of course, he had a puncture and dropped down to fifth, which meant he wasn't going to win the World Championship. But he overtook people, and two people ended up third. Lap chart chaos. He didn't even know he'd won the World Championship. And there's a famous picture of the Teddy Mayer, the now sadly departed, died McLaren boss at the time, raising his three fingers up in James's face. You're third, mate. You're third. You're champion. Now, that was broadcast. And that was unheard of. Other than Monaco and the British Grand Prix, no Formula One races had been broadcast. And the idea of broadcasting a race from Japan was completely extraordinary, but it grabbed attention. And I remember going to school the next day and standing on the Victoria line in London on the tube and seeing the full back page of the Sun newspaper was Hunt wins. And I couldn't believe it. A full page of the country's biggest selling newspaper was about the sport that some maniac had invented for my personal enjoyment. And by this time I was 13, so a little bit more worldly wise. But by that time, even my mates at school, Hunt won. Yes, Hunt did win. It's not just Arsenal and Tottenham Hotspur and West Ham United. We were Londoners. Anyway, so that then gradually created interest. And of course, James Hunt was a larger-than-life character. You know, he married Richard Burton's ex-wife, Susie. He shagged everything that moved. He was blonde and handsome, and he turned up at black tie do's wearing jeans and T-shirt and no shoes at all, barefoot. And he drank and he did drugs, and he was an extraordinarily interesting person. So in this country, he revolutionized it. And then it was decided not the next season, 77, but the season after that, 78, that the BBC would create a program called Grand Prix, which would have highlights every Sunday night. And there was another person who was very important in terms of promoting interest in the sport in this country, UK, was Murray Walker. And Murray Walker, of course, was the voice of motorsport. And really, we owe it all in some ways. And by now, it would have become more mainstream now, 50 years later, obviously. But James Hunt and Murray Walker were the two influences that accelerated widespread adoption of an increase of interest in this country, in the UK, in motorsport. And by that time, you know, we get into the 80s, and then it became a sport that people knew about. I didn't work in it at that time. I didn't work into it in it until the early 90s. I went through various different jobs and pastimes and so on. And actually, I ended up working as a racing journalist, greyhound racing journalist. So which I won't go into in too much detail because it takes too long. But by hook or by crook, I ended up working at Wembley Dog Track, Wembley Greyhound Track, which, by the way, was the stadium in which, you know, England won the 1966 World Cup final with 90,000 people there. But every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday night, the same stadium had 300 people in it to watch a few dogs running around the track, running around the famous pitch, and around, you know, a circuit around the outside, the perimeter of the famous football pitch. And astonishing that place should host two such extraordinarily important sporting events. Anyway, I ended up being writing for the Racing Post from time to time, not often, but from time to time, and then doing subbing shifts, and then realizing that perhaps I could actually be a journalist who worked in cars or motor racing, because I was still reading Autosport and also now reading Car magazine. Never the most imaginative title, I always thought, Car, but no doubt what it was about. And I applied for a job as sub-editor of Car and got it because of my background of having done subbing at the Racing Post and having written a few columns about greyhound racing. And when I saw them, I was able to explain to them, you know, I had an enormous knowledge of cars and motorsport, which I did by that time. And then after that, you know, in a sense, I was working as sub-editor of Car magazine, then features editor. And the editor was Gavin Green, who had raced himself in Australia, Formula Ford, as a kid or as a teenager. And he and I were the two on the magazine who were interested in motor racing as well as cars. But if the editor and the features editor is interested in something, it generally gets in. So we started doing the odd feature, and Nigel Roebuck started writing Formula One columns for Car. I ended up writing a few pieces, and then I was headhunted to be the first kind of main editor of F1 Racing Magazine, and then I was off on my way.
Plus, so then F1 Magazine, and I know you've mentioned this in other interviews and all the research we've done preparing, but it is one of the most amazing stories about finding something out about a team from the journalistic perspective. The extra pedal or brake steering, or however, there's a couple different titles that people give to it. The third pedal after the gas, the brake, and then turned out that you and the photojournalist found out a third pedal in the McLaren in 1997. I think it was Hakkinen and Coulthard who had it in the cars. Could you explain to us, was there, and I recognize it was a different time and the way you looked at the photos, but just what happened is sort of the chronology of events and then the light bulb that went off in your head when you realized what you'd found?
So it would take ages to go into all the detail, but I'll quickly say the person who needs all the credit for this is Darren Heath, who is the photographer concerned. So in those days, we didn't have digital cameras. So he would come back to the office on the Sunday night late, arrive back at 11 or 12 after a European race with his films, which he wouldn't have seen. He just had the physical films, the rolls of Fuji Velvia 35mm, and he would take them to a professional processing depot. We always used Metro in Clerkenwell, again in London, and he would wait 2 hours, let's say, until they had been processed and mounted on. No, it wouldn't have been mounted. They'd have been just in strips of transparency. There's a huge light box, and he's sitting, leaning over the light box with his loupe, which means a little magnifying glass, looking at the transparency, the line of transparency film. And he said, Matt, come and have a look at this. This was the Austrian Grand Prix of 1997. He said, look at this. I was shooting at the exit of the Lauda curve. The Lauda curve was a third gear left-hander, obviously called after Niki Lauda. I was shooting at the exit of the Lauda curve. Look at the Ferraris, look at the Benettons, look at the Arrows, look at everyone else, and then look at the McLarens. So I dutifully looked as he suggested. And I said, mate, obviously the McLarens can't be the exit of the corner because the rear brake discs are glowing red. He said, exactly. That's why I've asked you to come and have a look at it. It is the exit, I'm telling you. I said, mate, it can't be. He said, it is. They are applying the brakes on the exit of the corner. I said, why on earth would you do that? Why would you do that? Don't be silly, mate. He said, exactly. There is something going on here, isn't there? And then we discussed it and we thought there must be something going on. And there was a lot of innuendo at the time about whether traction control, which was then illegal, was being deployed on various cars. There'd been innuendo about it, as you well know, whether or not it had been used illegally on the Benettons in 1994, and perhaps it had and perhaps it hasn't. I'm not saying it had, and one is assured that it hadn't, but that was the rumour. And Ross Brawn was involved, obviously, in the Benetton, and then Ross Brawn was involved at the Ferrari, and there was lots of innuendo, none of it proved, and probably all false, saying that teams involved with Ross Brawn and other people and had used traction control or clever ways to deploy something like traction control. So at that point, we thought, have we caught McLaren using illegal traction control? And as I say, to be very clear, I'm not accusing anyone of using illegal traction control, not Benetton, not Ferrari, and of course not McLaren. It turned out that it wasn't illegal traction control anyway on the McLaren, but what it was a very clever way that they had worked out that totally legally and ingeniously that they could minimize understeer on the exit of a corner and tuck the car in to give a clean, fast exit by applying just to the inside rear wheel a little touch of brake, just to tuck the car in and stop it understeering, a little bit like a fiddle brake on a bike. And it was very clever, and it was operated by a separate pedal that was switchable by a cockpit-mounted device where it would either go left rear or right rear, left rear or right rear. And Häkkinen really got with it, the program, very quick, better than Coulthard, in fact. And we tried to find out what it might possibly be, and we were tipped off by somebody what it was. So we knew that what we had to do was shoot the footwell. Now, how do you shoot the footwell? You can't shoot the footwell. So the next race was was at Nürburgring, and as the race began, the two McLarens, which showed that it was working well, were in first and second position. All the Mercedes top brass, because it was McLaren Mercedes, of course, and it was in Germany, all the Mercedes top brass there. And Darren was at the circuit, and he blagged a paddock scooter from Jordan, actually, so that wherever, because cars broke down in those days, they don't so much now, but they used to break down, and the Mercedes engines weren't very reliable. And I said, if I see on the television monitors that one of the McLarens has broken down, I will ring you and you can get to whatever turn. Anyway, they were leading first and second, and they both broke down at the end of the start-finish straight. So I grabbed the phone, rang Darren. He said, I'm there. I'm going. He was on his Jordan scooter, zoomed down there, and had to try to get there before the marshals pushed the cars to safety. Very, intrepid of him. And he first of all ran to Coulthard's car, but Coulthard had put the steering wheel back, which is the regulation you must do, and therefore he couldn't get his camera down into the footwell. So he ran round to Häkkinen's car, and Häkkinen, in his frustration, he'd been leading, Coulthard had been second. Häkkinen, in his frustration, hadn't bothered to replace the steering wheel, which, by the way, he was never fined for. So I know it's 26 years ago. It's probably a bit too late now. But he was never fined for that. But it was our great luck, because it meant there was room for Darren to plunge his camera down into the footwell and begin to shoot. He couldn't see what he was shooting. And, of course, he couldn't see what he had shot because it wasn't digital film. So when he shot it, he said, I think I've got it. I hope I've got it. I shot it a number of times. And then the marshals arrived and he had to sling his hook. And it wasn't till later that evening, late at night, early hours of Monday morning. And he rang me from Metro Processing in Clerkenwell, North London, and said, Matt, one of the pictures is absolutely perfect. Accelerator pedal on the right, brake pedal in the middle, secondary brake pedal on the left. We've got it. And then we ran it as a double-page spread in the magazine, and it was one of the biggest scoops in motor racing history, and it made Darren Heath's name, and I rode his coattails for a little while as well. It was very, very annoying to Ron Dennis, who accused us or wondered whether we had broken into his factory to take pictures, which of course we hadn't, and nor would we have done, because it was a monthly magazine, so it wasn't seen for 2 weeks. See, it's not like you tweeted it the next minute. It was 2 weeks, completely held secret until that time. Brilliant story. But then, lo and behold, 11 years later, I was working for Ron Dennis. But let me tell you, when that magazine came out, the chances of me working for Ron Dennis seemed extraordinary.
That's what I wanted to ask you about, because as you say, fast forward, you're going to end up going to McLaren, and Ron Dennis, according to the articles I read, is like headhunting you to bring you in. And this is like, I think it was, in fact, an interview I saw you do with Cameron F1 last year. You used the phrase, you were a poacher turned gamekeeper here, because did that form part of the early discussions when he's bringing you in? Do you have to kind of clear the air on that one before you come in, or is it water under the bridge by that point?
We cleared the air well. I wouldn't say we cleared the air. He filled the air with Fury. next race after the magazine came out, which was Jerez 1997. That was the last race of that season. But as you remember, there was another controversy that happened then, which was that Michael Schumacher attempted a professional foul on Jacques Villeneuve in order to stop him winning the championship, and failed. So and Villeneuve was the champion. So and then there was the winter break, which was longer then than it is now. So yeah, Ron had said his piece at Jerez in 97, and after that, it became a difficulty because the teams had to decide whether to do one of two things, or indeed both, which was copy the McLaren brake steer system or object to it, or in Ferrari's case, both. And they did manage to get it banned in early 2008, as you know. In early 1998, as you know. But by that time, McLaren's car was the championship-winning car, and they duly won the World Championship. So Ron he then won the World Championship again the following year, 99. So he brake steer was in the past. And anyway, he probably compartmentalized the villain of that piece, not so much as me and Darren, but more as Ferrari, who had got it banned. So, and anyway, Ron was always predisposed to loathe Ferrari. And that's an ongoing life story of Ron's Formula One career. So what then happened, of course, fast forward to 2008, is that I'd got to know Ron quite well. I'd interviewed him, and for my sins, for some reason, got on well with him, even though we're very different people, obviously, in a million different ways. But we got on well. And, motor racing or Formula One was different in those days. A journalist would just have dinner with a team principal, even as recently as this century, which is 20 odd years ago. But I would have dinner with Ron occasionally, just me and him. Thankfully, he paid because he chose extraordinarily good wine. But anyway, we would do that. And then again, Ferrari and the FIA got on his case in 2007, so literally 10 years later, with Spygate. Right. So we've gone from brake steer to Spygate. And I was a journalist. I was still the same job as I was in 1997, which was the editor of F1 Racing magazine. But by that time, F1 Racing was huge. I mean, 1997, it was on sale in one language in one country, English, UK. By 2007, 10 years later, it was on sale in 34 languages in 110 countries.
Wow.
And there was still no real internet in the same way as there is now, and absolutely no social media. So what F1 Racing reported mattered, and it was read by 3 million people. So the sponsors minded about it, the teams minded about it, and I'd got to know everyone. So I started getting phone calls from Richard Woods at the FIA, very capable, I'm going to say spin doctor. He is obviously a communications director, but he was a spin doctor type of communications director, the best we've seen the most effective we've seen in Formula One, I think, in that area still. And Luca Colliani, who was the director of comms of Ferrari. And they were ringing me as an editor saying, you've seen what's happened. McLaren have been caught in possession of 780 pages of Ferrari design IP. It's an absolute disgrace, isn't it? And I was getting that, as all journalists were. They were, Richard and Luca were just calling one after another influential journalists, which was their job, and they were right to do. And we're getting nothing from McLaren. McLaren were not representing themselves. And I rang Ron directly. I said, Ron, what's going on? I'm getting all this from Ferrari and all this from the FIA. He said, no, we're not saying anything. I said, you can't just not say anything. Ron is a brilliant person, but never really got the media and always mistrusted journalists. And I said, you're just going to have the story written about you entirely from the perspective of your enemies in the narrative. You've got to do something. Oh, I'm not going to get involved in that. You got to. Anyway, it didn't go well the summer for him, obviously. And it was then fast forward to the Turkish Grand Prix 2007, and he rang me on the Thursday and said, "Are you in the paddock?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Come and see me." So I went to the McLaren Brand Centre, went upstairs, and by that point, he said, "Come and work for me. Come and work for me. You do it. You're right. I should have some representation. This narrative is getting out of hand. It's always being reported from the Ferrari FIA point of view. We aren't the terrible guilty party that we're being made out to be. Come and work for me." And I realized that actually I was very lucky. I've always been incredibly lucky, by the way. I've always been an incredibly lucky man. And I realized he had no one else to turn to because he needed someone who understood Formula One journalism, which I did, who knew all the main players, which I did, who perhaps had the ability to think strategically around media narratives, which I think I probably did, who knew personally Max Mosley and Bernie Ecclestone, which of course he did, but in an adversarial way, particularly in terms of Max. Whereas I was, for my sins, friendly with Bernie Ecclestone and Max Mosley. I never went to a dungeon with Max Mosley. I was, for my sins, friendly with him, and indeed had commissioned him to write 12 columns for F1 Racing, and was chummy, as far as one ever can be, with Bernie Ecclestone and Max Mosley. And so, and the most important thing, because all those qualifications I've just mentioned applied to quite a few journalists who'd been around in Formula One for a long time, but also Ron had to have someone who he liked and trusted. And the Venn diagram worked out with the intersections of all those circles. Out of the 7 billion people in the world, there was only one person. See how lucky I've been. Incredibly lucky. So through luck rather than judgment, I was the only person he could turn to. So he turned to me and we negotiated my arrival. Big pay rise for me, which was very handy and very nice. And then I had 10 great years at McLaren.
And what an opening year to walk in on 2008, right? I mean, that must have been amazing to be part of that. I've heard you talk about the whole Felipe Massa handshake to Lewis at the end of that epic Grand Prix, and rather than make you tell that story again, the kind of thing I would be interested in is when it comes to your job as communications officer, and you've got to manage all these various different things and interactions. In the moments after a driver wins the championship, are you almost just a fan alongside Lewis at that point? Does he need any guidance, or is it just the euphoria and you don't mind? Or is there still that moment where you need to go and sit him down and say, this is how we're going to talk to everybody about what you've just achieved? Because it feels like that is almost, as a fan, I want that to just be the euphoria comes out of Lewis's mouth and there is no kind of coaching. But what happens in those moments from being champion through to then going facing the media?
It's just the euphoria. At that moment, once you've won, I used to, as a journalist and as a fan of sport, you'd sometimes see people, the moments of sporting euphoria. So someone scores the winning goal in the World Cup final, football, and the look of extraordinary euphoria on his face as he scores that goal. Now, you can tell that's just genuine. But then sometimes I used to see when, let's say, Williams won a race in Formula One, and the marketing team would hug each other with equal zeal. And I used to think, are they really that happy, or is it a kind of put on? Is it a put on? Because they didn't drive the car, they didn't score the winning goal in the FA Cup, in the World Cup final. They're marketing people, and are they really that happy? I remember thinking that. All I can tell you from having been there, finally, poacher turned gamekeeper, as you say, when I was in the garage at Interlagos in 2008, and we thought we'd blown it, didn't we? Because Lewis had to be fifth and he was sixth. And so Massa was going to win the championship. So we were just sitting there with that dread, that feeling of everything we've all done this year, all of it, is going to come to nothing. Just because Lewis can't get past Sebastian Vettel's Toro Rosso. It's all gone to nothing. And as the laps are going past, you're just hoping against hope, but dreading against dread. And then, of course, we know what happened. He won the World Championship on the last corner of the last lap of the last race. Couldn't make it up. It still makes me emotional to remember now, all these years later. And all I can tell you, I mean, I'd recently hired Steve Cooper, a brilliant comms guy, now works for Aston Martin. Brilliant guy. And I'd recently hired him. And as we crossed the line, I didn't actually happen to see him. So you hug whoever you're next to. And it was only about 3 minutes later I saw Steve, and I'd hired him that year. And I just saw him across the pit lane. I just pointed at him and just put my arms wide. Steve! And we sprinted at each other, and, you know, like in two chests colliding, two big guys slamming into each other. It is not put on. It was pure joy, pure joy. And at that point, obviously, we had to take Lewis to be interviewed by all the people. And it was just, even Ron Dennis said, Matt, it's yours. It's yours. It's yours. Just fill your boots. All the media. Apologise for my not very good Ron Dennis impression. By the way, people don't do Ron Dennis impressions. They do impressions of the accepted way of doing a Ron Dennis impression, which is not very good. So there we are. It makes him sound like this kind of Cockney gangster, which certainly isn't. Anyway, he did say that. And that's what you do. You just let Lewis Hamilton talk to the press, and out comes the emotion. And that's what everyone wants to see.
You know, you tell some amazing stories about Lewis through your relationship with him, starting obviously then and the time you were together and when your mom was ill and then after she passed. You tell some stories that, honestly, listening to them brought out the emotion in me. And I love learning about some of these champions who, you know, maybe the cynic and a sports fan in me, I always watch from the outside and I don't know what these champions are actually like. And you want to embrace what you hear. We had a gentleman on the podcast who told us about Michael Schumacher, and he worked with him. And Schumi would put pictures of the team up in his driver's room to learn their names quickly and faster during the season, so he would know more about them as soon as he could. And are the stories you tell of Lewis true? Is he really that amazing a guy? Because I see it from the outside and I want to believe it, but again, I'm fed a narrative at times and I worry.
I have enormous respect and affection for Lewis Hamilton. Look, I'm very lucky, as I've said. I've worked with 4 world champions: Lewis, Jensen, Button, Fernando Alonso, and Sebastian Vettel. Always worked really well with all of them. By the way, I'm just going to press pause a second. There's an annoying Twitter rumor going around, which started in Spain and has been continued in the UK by journalists who ought to know better, which is that I don't get on well with Fernando Alonso because we didn't enjoy working together in McLaren in 2007. Well, I wasn't at McLaren in 2007. I started at McLaren on the 1st of January 2008, by which time he had gone. So not only is it not true, but it is chronologically impossible that it could possibly be true.
Doesn't matter on Twitter.
And moreover, I then did work with him at McLaren when he returned, happily and successfully, in 2015, 2016, and 2017. So I don't know if you're allowed to say this, but it's a load of BOLLOCK. Anyway, that's by the by. I've worked with 4 world champions and I've enjoyed working with all of them. And very enjoyable it is. They're remarkable people. Lewis, I won't tell the story. I know the story you're referring to with connection to my mother, but you know, I've told it before, and I'm interested that it resonated with you. It's all completely true. He's a beautiful, kind person. I think we have to say, I always used to say that there were 3 drivers who sat head and shoulders as the GOATs, the greatest of all time, which was Juan Manuel Fangio in the 50s and Jim Clark in the 60s and Ayrton Senna in the 80s and 90s, and I stand by that, but I think you have to add Lewis Hamilton now because of the magnum opus, just because of, the 7 or 8, if you prefer, world championships, and all the 100 Grand Prix wins and all the other things. But I think the interesting thing about Lewis is also, he's now 38, isn't he, I think? He may win the world championship this year. He may have considerably more success to add to his enormously successful magnum opus already. He may. But the really interesting thing, I think, is what he, and indeed Seb Vettel, who has retired, will do with the next 40, 50 years. Yeah. Because both of those, and I've been delighted and happy to work with both of them, and most recently with Seb, of course, at Red Bull. Sorry, he had his success at Red Bull, but at Aston Martin, is the things they do off track.
Yeah,
realizing that their fame, their popularity, and their social conscience comes together to give them a responsibility to do something, if I may say so, for the good of humankind, and both of them do it. And what Sebastian Vettel and, when he retires, Lewis Hamilton do over the next 40 years is going to be fascinating to watch, and maybe just as fascinating as what we've seen them do on track.
Matt, I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to apologize in advance for screwing up the way I'm going to ask it, because it's a hard question to get across. We, on the dirty side, and as we've done this podcast for a year, not that long, but as fans, I've loved watching drivers share their personality, their causes, what motivates them, what's near their heart. And you, and I'm going to coordinate 3 things here poorly, you obviously are an ambassador for the LGBTQ plus community, and your time with Racing Pride and what you stand for is amazing. And I watched after the pandemic when here in America we had social unrest, and Lewis stood for what he believed in. And I appreciated that so very much, to see that personality. Here's the question. In the last 2 weeks, we got on our little podcast, Rob and I got kind of frustrated with a story that came out from the FIA. The new article to the Sporting Code that, quote, the general making and display of political, religious, and personal statements or comments notably in violation of the general principle of neutrality promoted by the FIA is banned unless permission given beforehand. And this year we lose Seb from the grid. A man who found that voice, a champion who found that voice and shared it more as he progressed, which I appreciated. And Lewis is sort of alone. And now there are others. Mick stood out for a lot of things. A lot of drivers have. But being vocal, at least to the outside, you see Lewis do these things. And A, it felt as though we had the jewelry policy from last year again, targeting a particular driver. But then B, how are drivers supposed to vocalize their causes if the FIA has this rule? And am I misinterpreting? Maybe I'm overdoing it, but I would love your thoughts.
Let me answer. So look, I don't work for the FIA. I don't represent the FIA. I currently don't work for Aston Martin. Well, I've stopped working for Aston Martin. I'm working as a consultant in Formula One, and I'll see where that takes me in 2023. So I'm in slightly in a kind of in-betweeny state at the moment, despite having worked in Formula One for the best part of 30 years. So that's, and I'm an F1 lifer. I couldn't imagine really earning my living in any other way now. And I don't want to retire. I'm 60, but I've just turned 60, but I want to work for a few more years in whatever way I will. So we'll see. Now, that's my disclaimer. So I'm not in a position to represent the FIA or explain or account for the FIA, and I ought not to do that. However, you knew there was a however coming. The however is multifold, and it's this. I would be very surprised if Lewis allows himself to be entirely silenced. I would absolutely be certain that were he still racing, Seb would definitely not have allowed himself to be entirely silenced. So that's the first point. Second point is, and this applies to sports, not only Formula One, but all sports. If you request and require athletes, players, drivers to support your diversity and equality and inclusivity initiatives, such as #WeRacers1 in the case of Formula One, and they do, there was, before every broadcast, there is that couple of minutes where every single driver vocalizes his support of the sport's commitment to equality, diversity, etc., inclusivity. If you require them to do that, then you've opened the bottle, you've rung the bell. You can't then really pick and choose and say, well, we do want you to support our initiatives, and We Racers One, and we do want you to do a little piece to camera which we will show before every single Grand Prix. But you may not do other things at all, simply because they're your own enthusiasms. I don't think it's reasonable to do the one without t'other. And then the other point, so that's two separate points. The first point being, I don't think necessarily all drivers will obey. And the second point being, it's unreasonable probably to tell drivers that they may not express their own opinions, having demanded that they express your opinions. And then the third one is this political statements. I know it isn't only political statements that have been mentioned, but We Racers One, for instance, and End Racism, and all the other things which the FIA itself and, of course, Formula One have espoused, and indeed standing up for LGBTQ plus equality, has absolutely nothing to do with politics. Nothing. It's human rights. It's got nothing to do with politics. Politics is not what it is. It's human rights. So you can't really tell people not to stand up in favor of human rights. I don't think you can. I don't think that's necessarily a thing that you should do or indeed can do. And finally, what is the sanction? What is actually going to happen? If Lewis Hamilton turned up at the first race and with a End Racism t-shirt or a Black Lives Matter t-shirt or a rainbow stripe or a whatever, are they actually going to censure the most successful driver in the history of the sport, the only black driver, for standing up for human rights? Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Thank you for helping me through my awkward question, but that was a great answer. I appreciate it, and I completely agree. It just, thank you.
Now, I'm aware that the clock is against us, and I could spend all day talking to you. And being as we've just kind of touched on the subject of the diversity there, I do want to just quickly go over. It was difficult to dig into your involvement in the W Series. I read one place that said that you and David Coulthard were the founders. Other places said that you were part of bringing it to life. How did it come about? How do you decide, well, A, what was your involvement? And B, if you are part of the founding team, how do you go about founding a series?
I wasn't the founder. The founders were David Coulthard, Catherine Bonmuir, and Sean Wadsworth. And I don't think David's involved actually very much now, but Sean Wadsworth is the principal shareholder, and Catherine Bonmuir is the CEO. And David got me into it. He said, he rang me up in early 2018. So I'd left McLaren. I'd written my novel. So I kind of took a sabbatical a bit for about 8 months to write a novel, which was for charity. And there's been, I think there's a new book out called Spare, which was written by a member of the royal family, which may be selling more copies.
It's getting a little press.
Marginally.
Yeah.
Marginally more. But
I'd recommend people go get The Boy Made the Difference, is what I would do. Because everyone's going to have Spare. You want to be the one who reads Matt's book, is what you want to do.
Yeah, I think I'm going to catch up with Spare. I think I am. Anyway, joking apart, all proceeds go to charity. So there you go to Children's Cancer Charity. I haven't taken a penny out of it. So, which perhaps can't be said of SPAT. Anyway, never mind. I would say, what can I say? So I was, Dave Coulthard said to me, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm consulting, I'm doing this and that. He said, would you like to consult for W Series? And it hadn't been announced yet. He explained what it was. It was going to be called, well, it was at one point, it was going to be called Formula She. That wasn't a good idea. Then it might have been going to be called Formula W, but that wasn't possible, copyright reasons. So, and so on, legal reasons. So it ended up with W Series. Anyway, I said I would help. And I started off just freelancing for them, giving them a few days a month. And in the end, they said, well, look, we like what you do. Would you like to be our comms director and basically, tell the story to the world? This was a secret at this stage. It was just 3 or 4 of us sitting in a tiny office in Victoria Street in London. And I said, yeah, I will do that. So we did do that. But it was founded by David Coulthard, Sean Wadsworth, Catherine Bonmuir, and then they brought in me, Dave Ryan, both ex-Mclaren guys, of course, me and Dave Ryan. So we knew each other already, and Dave was the racing director, and I was the communications director, and we worked together. And when we announced it, which was October 2018, and nobody had heard of W Series, nobody had heard of it at all, and we sent one press release out, and I'd also briefed under embargo some key journalists, old friends, and when that came out, we broke the internet, and it was that was when I realised we're onto something here. I'm very sorry that W Series didn't manage to complete its season last year, and I know that it's in jeopardy as we speak. But even if W Series fails or doesn't continue, let me put it that way, I don't think it will have been proved to be a failure, because we now have the Academy, right, which is under the official auspices of Formula One. And we have other movements towards trying to promote female participation in Formula One, in the cockpit and outside, not just Formula One, motorsport in general. And I think, to be fair, the catalyst was W Series. If W Series hadn't done what it had done, perhaps we wouldn't be having these other very valuable, important things that we are now having as well. And if W Series ends up not thriving, because other things rode its coattails and took over, if you like, that's life. That's unfortunate, but that's life. It might be, W Series might be the Sony Betamax, and the Academy might be VHS. It might be like that. But anybody who's connected to W Series should have nothing to be ashamed of, should be very proud of themselves for having done something. Don't forget, when W Series was invented, its first season was 2019, but when it was invented and announced in 2018, one of the things that was said to us is, it will be very difficult for you to run a series without grid girls, That seems like 50 years ago, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah,
it
really does. Oh my gosh. Just because we are running out of time here, you just mentioned breaking the internet. If I think about things that broke the internet as well, you worked with somebody who I think has one of the biggest social presences without having a social presence themselves until the day they announced their retirement. And I'm talking about Seb. He never had a Twitter account, Instagram or anything. Then he suddenly joined the internet and the internet went into meltdown. And then he put out that video, which was just fantastic. As it's part of Aston Martin, is that under your watch as the comms director, or is that something that Seb did? I'm assuming he came to you if it was on his own part, to run through. I mean, talk us that moment when you knew Seb was retiring and kind of the piece that was going with it.
I'd known Seb for a long time. I'd interviewed him as a journalist before I was at McLaren even, and before he was a Formula One driver. I remember interviewing him when he was a reserve driver at BMW Sauber. And I got on well with him. Everyone did. He was this precocious young German kid who knew about Little Britain and Monty Python, and he was interested. And then actually I was involved a little bit in trying to bring him to McLaren at the end of 2007. This hasn't really been reported. So there you go. There's a little scoop for you. McLaren, when Fernando left McLaren the first time, which was all in a bit of a rush. I wasn't there yet. I joined on the 1st of January 2008. But the rumours were that Nico Rosberg would join Lewis at McLaren for 2008. That didn't happen. They were also talking to Heikki Kovalainen, which of course did happen. But Ron rang me and said, look, we'd like to talk to Vettel, but we can't because of the contract recognition board. But you haven't technically joined us yet. This was December 2007. So you can. So I had a few conversations directly with Seb. He didn't have a manager then, doesn't have a manager now. And so I spoke directly with Seb on the phone a few times in December 2007, saying, I haven't joined McLaren yet, so you are allowed to talk to me. I am allowed to talk to you. And he was quite interested. He was quite interested and wanted to join and tried hard to get out of his Red Bull contract. Isn't that amazing?
Wow. That is amazing.
Isn't that amazing? And he would have then not raced for Toro Rosso, and he would have then not raced for Red Bull, and Hamilton Vettel would have been a thing at McLaren for some years in a potentially title-winning series of cars. So how about that? Anyway, that didn't happen. But anyway, so I knew him quite well, and then we, when I realised I got to finally working with him properly, which was 2021, I said to him, look, what kind of stuff do you want to do? I know you famously aren't that keen on media work. And he said, nah, not that keen on it, really. You know, I know I've got to do it, but I'm not that keen on it. You know, they just asked me questions about, you know, do I hate Ferrari and all that kind of thing. Just don't want to do it. So I said, well, you're going to have to do some of it. And by the way, you should. You know, these are journalists, some of whom pay out of their own pocket to go around the world to report it. And then there's important people, you know, television, you know, we need you to do that. And he said, I know. But can I do some more interesting stuff as well? So we kind of created this program where he would do interesting, different things that no Formula One drivers had done before. What bothers you? And I remember him saying, well, I've just come to this factory, Silverstone. I was talking to him. And he said, look, I drove from my house to the airport in Switzerland. Everything was absolutely spotlessly clean. Then I arrived in Heathrow, and you guys sent a car for me. And all the way along the M4, all the way around the M25, and all the way along the M40, all I saw was crap, rubbish on the side of the motorway. What is all this litter? What's going on in UK? So that's how the whole thing of litter picking, the whole litter picking thing started. So we started saying, okay, so anything that you find upsetting or annoying, or something you want to say or stand up in favor of, let's do it. Let's make a media thing out of it. That way you're doing your media work in a more interesting way than the way that you've been moaning that you don't want to do. And you'll actually be doing some good. And I think he saw that. And then we did some wonderful things. He went to Feltham Young Offenders Institution, what used to be called a Borstal, a boys' prison. And I'd found out that there was a new unit being opened within the prison, which was a car mechanics workshop. This is for boys. Obviously, prisons are not mixed gender, so it's either boys and this is a boys' prison, Borstal for boys, Young Offenders Institution. And this is for boys who had got involved in minor crime. Obviously not boys who'd committed murders, because they were not going to come out of prison soon. They were going to have to serve their time, and then when they got of a certain age, move into adult prisons, and perhaps stay in adult prisons for many years. Sadly, that there are those kind of people in boys' prisons. But these are the people who've done minor drugs offences or car crime, and we're going to be in there for a year. Perhaps they're 16 years old, and they're going to be out when they're 17. Do they want to be on life scrap heap from 17 to when they die age 80? Not only is that a waste of a life, it's also a huge waste of taxpayers' money in terms of re-imprisoning them when they re-offend, in terms of unemployment benefits, in terms of all those things. Much better to find a way of rehabilitating them. And I explained all this to Seb, and he said, this sounds brilliant. I'm a father of 3 children, and the very idea of someone being on life scrap heap at 17 makes me cry. So yes, I'll go down and I'll open this, and he literally cut the ribbon in the old-fashioned way. And we had BBC there and ITV there, and it was a big media story. But also, he was brilliant at it. And later that day, we took him to a school, walking distance from Waterloo Station, London Zone 1, one of the richest cities in the world. Yet there are food banks in London. Can you believe that? Food banks in one of the richest cities in the world, the capital city of the sixth largest economy in the world. There are food banks. And we found a school that was populated by the children of the kind of families who have to go to food banks. He was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And then that same evening, we took him to East London, Hackney, where he appeared on BBC Question Time, which no sports person really does, and no active Formula One driver ever had done. And he was brilliant. I thought brilliant.
Yeah,
he was
a lot better than one of the people sitting next to him, Suella Braverman, I remember. Anyway, who was a government minister at the time and sadly still is. Anyway, he was absolutely brilliant. And then, I've skipped over the other things he did, the bee hotels, the conservational promotional things he did, go-karting with young girls in Saudi Arabia, where obviously life is not always equal for everybody. And of course, Silverstone litter picking, and that was a brilliant thing because people assumed that he did 5 minutes for the cameras. He didn't. Having raced, he didn't complete the race, we DNF'd, but he having completed 40 odd laps of the British Grand Prix, he then spent hours on the grandstands picking up litter and filling black bags full of litter, with a few fans that volunteered to join him, but they all had to work hard as well. All the fans, they couldn't just do selfies; they had to do the litter picking. And then when all of them went home, even him having competed in the British Grand Prix that afternoon, he then, with no cameras, jumped in the dump truck, the dust cart, and went down to the processing centre to see how the items that needed to be recycled would be recycled. He was and is a remarkable person. Brilliant racing driver, 4-time world champion, obviously. But he and Lewis Hamilton, and I'm glad you mentioned Mick Schumacher as well, all three of them, but obviously mainly Lewis and Seb, absolutely realised that they have an opportunity which they therefore see as a duty to parlay their fame and popularity for the good of humankind. I respect and love them both.
Well, in keeping with that, a nice little segue here, our duty is to not keep you back from the rest of your Saturday. We've gone over by a lot, and I really appreciate you staying on. Will you have 100 seconds more to stay with us to close this out with our silly little quiz?
Go ahead.
Excellent. Brian, are you ready to start the timer?
I've never done it right before, but I'm going to give it a shot again. Rob, are you ready with the questions?
Yes, I am.
Matt, the 100 seconds of DRS will begin in 3, 2, 1.
First poster you had on your bedroom wall?
Carlos Reutemann, Brabham BT44B.
Favourite Formula One track?
Brands Hatch. Am I allowed Brands Hatch?
Yeah. Yes, you're allowed Brands Hatch. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
If you were in the pit crew, which tyre would you change?
Left front.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Favourite livery on an F1 car of all time?
Lotus 79.
If you could add a James Bond-style gadget to an F1 car, what would it be?
Ejector seat, and I won't tell you who I'd put in it.
Favourite non-motorsport sport?
Snooker.
First memory of Formula One?
Seeing Jackie Stewart in the blue Tyrrell on the cover of Autosport in August 1972.
Do you have any lucky superstitions?
No.
Best F1 driver of all time?
4 of them: Fangio, Clark, Senna, Hamilton.
DRS, is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Not particularly good.
What's your favourite country to visit?
Australia.
Do you prefer a wet or dry race?
Dry.
What's your favourite food?
Indian curry, but my husband doesn't like it, so we don't have it very often.
Which two drivers from different eras would you like to see head-to-head?
Jim Clark and Tazio Nuvolari.
If you could swap the cars out for any other type of transportation, what would you choose?
In sport or for me?
For you.
It needs wheels, bikes, I suppose.
And we've gone over. That was a little bit over.
That's fine. Thank you so much for playing along there, Matt. That was some nice answers in there. It's gonna keep me thinking now today who might be going in that ejector seat, but you can keep that one a secret. And yes, we're 10 minutes over, so thank you so much for even entertaining doing this, Matt, and giving up some of your Saturday for us. It's been brilliant. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
You're welcome. Matt. Thank you, guys.
That was absolutely amazing. I love the fact that he was willing to do DRS, despite the fact he didn't really know what it was. Like, I'd put it in the email brief to him, but, you know, he's a busy man, and we kind of explain it, silly little quiz, and he's like, yeah, let's do it. And I loved his answer, the ejector seat. I think that's fantastic. The thing that I do want to share that didn't come up because we'd stopped recording, I wasn't quite sure how much of a football fan he was. You know, given that he traded in Shoot for Autosport all those years ago as a 9.5-year-old lad. But then he kept mentioning references to Highbury, which is the area in London that Arsenal is based. So I kind of said, you know, Matt, do you have an allegiance to a football team? And with a smile on his face, he said, Arsenal, of course. At which point I had my Arsenal logo on my desk, my mouse mat, lifted it up, and mutual. Yeah. I think me and Matt can be friends now, Brian.
Yeah, that's great. And at this point, after a riveting hour conversation where I would honestly pay to sit and have more time to pick this man's brain and listen to stories, my eyes glazed over and I fell asleep as you guys talked about this. So, it was, you know. Anyway, thanks again to Matt. That was I'm honored. As I think we said it. I don't know if it was in the interview or afterwards that he would take the time and the generosity of his time and perspective with us.
And the other bit that I have to share, because I shared it with you and I made a joke of it before we started recording with him, was that when I'd reached out to him to ask him, I'd gone out on a limb because he's kind of withdrawn from Twitter now because of like you heard, you know, some of the abuse he gets on there is terrible. So he's kind of withdrawn from Twitter. So I went after him down a different avenue and managed to get hold of him. Gave a little kind of teaser of our podcast and would he be willing to come on? And he surprised me by coming back and saying, yeah, here's my email address. Let's go for it. I then proceeded somehow to send an email entitled, Hey Mike. I have no idea who Mike is. I can't even believe I did that. He responded and my heart sank because on my phone, the preview, all I could see was the first line that said, Hi Rob, my name's Matt. And I was like, oh God, I've blown it. I opened it up and he said, but what the heck, let's do it anyway. And I think you heard from him, he's a good sport. Before we recorded, I apologized again and he said, that's no problem, Henry.
Oh man, what a guy! He is just the best. So thank you to Matt. Rob, thanks for connecting that. Just, you know, we share everything at the Dirty Side in terms of, you know, we joke about when Rob couldn't talk when Jack was on, and he talks about this. I mean, I have hosed up before we got Nate. I hosed up all of the emails going to ESPN and screwed up the calendar of the meeting. I mean, like, we are just two normal guys with a day job trying to have fun with F1. And for that, we love the community. Thanks for listening, everyone. And next week, Rob, do you want to tease a little bit about what might be coming?
Yeah, at the moment we have another guest penciled in. I say penciled in because it's another busy guy. He might have to cancel. Who knows? If he does, we'll be scrambling, I think, for another Vale's Tales. But we should have another banger of a guest next week as well. So it's exciting times in the off season. And yeah, again, massive thanks to Matt. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll speak to you next week.